Good morning on this Sunday, December 8th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. One of Georgia's longest trials is history after a jury finds two co-defendants in the YSL case not guilty of murder and racketeering charges. President-elect Donald Trump taps former Senator Kelly Loeffler for a cabinet position, and Democrats in Georgia may be restructuring their leadership at the top of the state party. Melita, Phil, and Brian are all here. Alicia Thomas-Searcy is filling in for Theron this week. I hope my voice holds. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
After an extensive and tumultuous trial, the jury reached verdicts for the two remaining defendants in the high-profile YSL RICO case in Fulton County. A jury found them not guilty of murder and not guilty of the RICO Act. The trial, one of the longest in Georgia history, stems from an indictment against Young Thug and 27 others 2 years ago. And now prosecutors are looking to drop charges against 6 more defendants who were not part of this trial. Young Thug copped a plea deal last month and is now out on probation, but not allowed to visit his hometown here for years. Phil, let's just kind of get your thoughts on what this all means. I mean, this was quite a circus.
Well, you're being kind. It was a disgrace. And I think the fact that we had these defendants go, you've had the Superior Court Judge Paige Whitaker constantly reprimanding the prosecutors and saying, you know, you're not doing this correctly, you're withholding evidence, which is a disgrace. Then you have to get remedial work on how the state's anti-racketeering law works. What a mess. And the first judge, why it was so long, to your point, Lori, the first judge was basically incompetent. He screwed the whole process up. That's when Judge Whitaker took it over, who then made the trains run on time and made it run smoothly. But this was a complete waste of the taxpayers' money.
Melita, it kind of makes you also question, you know, how many convictions can you get on these RICO charges?
Well, that's true. Now, 5 of the, if the judge approves throwing out the charges against 6, as proposed on Wednesday, you have only 5 of the 28 originally charged who still face charges. But yes, it makes you question the RICO case and the way jurors really criticized the way this case was presented. One of them said it was throwing everything against the wall and not focusing on the evidence needed for a conviction. And I think it does make you look at the RICO charges and how they are presented, but it also will force some reckoning with the DA's office on how to prosecute cases in a clear, concise manner, because it's almost inexcusable to have a trial last a full year. And the jurors get credit for sticking with the process and trying to at least bring justice.
Alicia, what does this mean for Fani Willis? And, you know, this was another high-profile case for her.
Yeah, I don't agree with the perspective that this was a waste of taxpayer dollars. I want to level set here. We're talking about communities in Atlanta and Fulton County that have been ravaged by violence. Hundreds of people have died, have been killed. You know, we're talking carjackings, shootings, all kinds of violent crime. And since June of 22, almost 300 people have been convicted under the RICO and Gang Act. So this is one trial that had a lot of attention, because there were some artists involved and there were questions around whether or not you could use rap music. But let's not forget the bigger picture here, that this is about keeping communities safe. And I think while folks often talk about the crime in Fulton County, let's not forget that they've had the 3rd highest decline in crime. And I think it's largely because of this aggressive prosecution to rid communities of crime.
And Brian, Fani Willis did mention that, you know, communities got safer once all of these folks were off the streets.
Well, communities got safer across the entire country. This is part of a criminal trend that we've seen post-COVID. We had a spike and then it went back down. It's hard to pull out Fulton's numbers and go, this is unique in the country. It's not. I'm thrilled to hear Alicia talking about the spate of violent crime that we've faced here in the community over the last 5 years. I, too, take gang violence and street gang threats very seriously. I'm glad to see prosecutors taking them on. The problem in this case is the jurors themselves were like, this was incompetently done. This was not a well-run operation. And if we want to accept the premise that these guys who were found not guilty are in fact dangerous to the community, the prosecutor has failed to get them off the street. Now, I do think that some of these folks will stay in jail on other charges, but when it comes to the big stuff, they were let off. This is a lot of time, a lot of oxygen in the judicial system for a nothing burger verdict.
But those aren't the facts. There were 18 people involved in this case. 2 of them were found not guilty. There are still many who have been convicted. There are still others who are still involved in this case. Again, I want to go back. This is one case of many. There are still 3 at least gangs that have been prosecuted. Those folks are in prison right now. So we cannot decide that because of this one case that there probably were some legal challenges. Maybe the strategy wasn't right. I'm not a lawyer. I can't speak to that. But we have to acknowledge that there are a number of cases where she and her team have been very successful, and it has led to a reduction of crime.
Well, trials should not last 2 years.
Exactly.
But that's not the prosecutor. That the prosecutors do not decide
No, it's because
how
they
long the
screwed
jury
up,
selection
they
goes.
screwed up, which delayed it.
All right, well,
Yeah.
let's move on to another high-profile case that y'all will be debating, the 2020 election interference case. This week, attorneys for President-elect Trump asked Georgia's Court of Appeals to dismiss the case against Trump. The filing claims that a sitting president is immune from criminal prosecution at the state and federal levels. Melita, to you on this.
Well, so President Trump's attorney, Steve Sadow, has said that the court lacks jurisdiction to proceed with Trump's indictment and prosecution because he's president-elect and will soon become the 47th president. This is based on a 2000 Office of Legal Counsel memorandum, which previously has only been enforced for federal cases. So now we have the arguments about whether this previous memorandum applies also to state cases, and that will be a matter for the courts to decide.
Brian?
We had a jury of 150 million Americans last month, and once they made their verdict clear, that should have been the end of these cases. For Fani Willis, this is a graceful off-ramp from what has been a disastrous decision from the very beginning. She should never have taken on this case. It's way too expensive, it's way too sprawling, and in my opinion, if it's anything, it's a federal case, not a local Fulton County one. So this is a great chance for her to say, forget it, he's right, he's president, we're going to drop this case, and really drop the case against everyone else. We also are seeing, other people who have been charged took plea deals, trying to now get out of those.
Kenneth Chesbrough.
Yes, as new facts have come out showing that the local jurisdiction doesn't have the authority to charge what he said the guilty plea for.
Alicia?
It wasn't the American people who decided that President Trump should be held immune. It was his Supreme Court that he handpicked. So let's remember that.
Voters
And that,
knew the facts, though.
that
Voters
is why
knew the facts of these cases and re-elected him as president.
That is why the federal case has been dropped. The Fulton County DA has been elected and re-elected, and it is her discretion to decide how she wants to move forward with this case. Most likely, my guess is, while he's president, this case will probably go on ice. At the end of the day, I will continue to say it, we are not above the law. No one is above the law. And when he and 18 co-conspirators tried to steal an election in 2020, they need to be held accountable for that. And guess what? The other folks who are not the president are still going to be held accountable for the crimes that they committed. That's how our system is supposed to work.
So one more issue that ties into this, because Fulton DA Fani Willis suffered a defeat in a civil case over open records. A Fulton County Superior Court judge ruled that Willis violated the Georgia Open Records Act after she did not provide records relating to Special Counsel Jack Smith and communications with the U.S. House Select Committee on the January 6th attack. The plaintiff, Judicial Watch, sued the DA after not getting those records, Phil.
Well, Lori, as journalists, we grew up on how great the Open Records Act is. It's a useful tool for the media. And it's again, another disgrace that Fani Willis is involved in. There's no reason why she should not have gotten those records. And of course, the U.S. House Congressional Committee is also wanting those records. What are those records? It's collusion with her and the Biden Justice Department and all the shenanigans. They were trying to take down President Trump with lawfare. And yeah, no one's against the law, above the law, but let's talk about Joe Biden sometime. He certainly got skated in this last week.
Well, I think it is interesting that the same records the public interest group was seeking are the same records that Jim Jordan, or Jordan, because he's not from Georgia, the congressman was trying to seek from Fani Willis. And so it will be interesting to see what happens when those records are produced and whether the assertions just made by Phil are indeed true.
Why is she stonewalling?
She's not. She's provided thousands of pages of documents. And so now that this judge has ruled, I'm sure she'll comply.
Okay, we'll leave it there, folks. Up next, another Georgian named to Trump's cabinet. We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
President-elect Trump names former Senator Kelly Loeffler to head up the Small Business Administration. Brian, is this a good fit for her? And what does this mean about a possible political future or political run?
I think this is a great fit for her. I'm very happy to have another Georgian in the cabinet. She can join our friend Doug Collins there. And of course, we have David Perdue going to China, allegedly. I mean, he's been nominated for that. So this is a great fit for Kelly Loeffler. She has been a very devout Trump loyalist. She deserves the spot in his cabinet. She has stood with him through thick and thin, but she also has a very legitimate business background argument to make, and really has a chance here to prove herself in the public sphere in a way that she never had time to do in the U.S. Senate. She only had a year there and had to campaign in a really rigorous race for that entire time. So this is a chance for her to show what she can do, to have some accomplishments that if she so wishes, she could run for office in Georgia in the future. You know, she needs to have a few things where she can prove that she helps small businesses thrive, more open, that kind of thing. Come home and run. She's still a relatively young woman with a lot of potential. So this is a great fit. I hope she does a great job.
And Melita, former Senator Perdue, named possibly ambassador to China. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's going to be a very interesting confirmation process, because Perdue, certainly in his business career, when he was working with Sarah Lee, he outsourced many of the productions that were currently in the United States over to China. And anybody who's ever been in a Dollar General, where he was CEO for a number of years, knows that they stock a lot of product from China. So he is not unfamiliar with China. And so it'll be very interesting to see how the promises of tariffs take place once he is serving as ambassador. You got to give his team credit, because the appointment was announced only Thursday evening, and by Friday morning at 7 a.m. it was already on his Wikipedia page.
Well, a couple quick points. I think, Brian, you covered Senator Loeffler. The political aspect of that is that she's not going to be running for the next cycle, and because think about it, the primary is going to be a year away.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so you've got to be raising money now. This whole dynamic has changed.
She doesn't have to.
That's a good point.
She spent $31
That's a
million
good
of her
point.
own money.
But it is better to
Yes.
spend other people's money than your own, Brian. Write that down. But anyhow,
$5 million for Trump, right?
and so let's talk about, I call it communist China, Melita. But anyhow, he's lived over there in the Far East. He knows how to negotiate. He's perfect. He worked with Trump when he was in the U.S. Senate. So I think that's a good pick, too.
Alicia?
I think it was interesting. The AJC talked about what it means for Senator Warnock to vote on them in particular. And I have no doubt that both senators from Georgia will take this process very seriously. But I do wonder, what those conversations are going to be like, considering that they were once his opponents.
Yes.
They weren't the nicest to him, and now they need him for his vote. So I'm very interested in seeing how this goes. I will say, though, that among all of the candidates that have been proposed from Trump, many of these seats I think are bought and paid for. I mean, Kelly Loeffler spent, I think, almost $5 million on the Trump campaign. But I will say, to Brian's credit, that she's qualified for this role. So we'll see what happens.
All right, moving on, and let's bring it home to Georgia. House Speaker John Burns continues to list out his priorities for the 2025 session. He says banning transgender girls from competing in women's sports will be a priority. Phil, we know Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones also has this as a priority, so do we expect to see some movement on this issue?
You will. This is a breath of fresh air. It needs to be done. The whole issue is fairness in sports. Why do you even have gender separate sports? We know the answer why, because biological biological differences between males and females that some people on the left just fail to understand. And of course, it's also a safety concern, let alone a fairness concern, with regard to some of the girls being injured by transgender men. And also, I think the vast majority of Georgians and Americans, frankly, don't want men and women's locker rooms and bathrooms.
Melita, considering the presidential election and how big of an issue this was in that race, where are Democrats on this in Georgia?
Well, after years of hearings about this issue in Georgia, and you need to note that the former Speaker Ralston was not in favor of this legislation. But over 4 years of multiple hearings, you never had any evidence of transgender athletes participating in Georgia school athletic programs. Transgender people as a whole are a very tiny percentage of the population, and of that small group, an even smaller percentage wish to participate in sports. And so this is an issue that Republicans can create fear and division and distrust with to deflect from some of their other policies. And it's really damaging because making this law then creates a license for children to bully transgender children. You know, we talk about grandchildren. I have 8 grandchildren. I would much prefer for my grandchildren to be loving, caring, respectful, accepting children to all of their friends, including any children who might be in the midst of gender questioning.
Brian, I hear you kind of mumbling over here.
Yeah, well, because I keep hearing from Democrats that this doesn't impact anybody, that this demographic doesn't exist. Okay, then what's the objection to the law? Who is it hurting? If there's nobody who wants to compete as a girl in sports who is biologically male, what's the big deal? Like, y'all seem to be falling on this sword. It was so fascinating to me that the Harris campaign never responded to the she's for they, them. They never could stand up to their extreme left flank and go, of course, biological males should not be in women's sports. They wouldn't do it. And it has been a political mistake on their part. This is something, to your point, I will say this, is this going to impact a lot of Georgians? No, it won't.
Well, then why do you need the law?
Exactly.
Because it is coming. Whether it's tomorrow or whether it's in 10 years.
It's coming around the whole country.
It's coming around the whole country. We have seen it in college with the swimmer who came to Georgia Tech a couple of years ago. So it is out there to some degree. And this is about fairness. My daughter finished second in the school-wide race this week. I'm so proud of her.
Aww.
But she was number 2 amongst the girls. And I saw the whole list, and she's pretty far down the list because there's a bunch of boys ahead of her. It is a fairness issue. There is a difference in ability and muscle tone.
Alicia.
I think you said it best. Beware, they're coming. It's coming all around the country. Those are the fear tactics that Republicans have used around this issue. This is not an issue of the left. This is not a platform issue for us. I would agree with you that the Harris campaign should have responded to that commercial, because largely no one on the Democratic side believes this is our thing. This is not our issue to fall on the sword on. And so, frankly, it's frustrating because, as Melita has talked about, as Democrats, our values are about embracing people for who they are. Republicans at one point believed in not creating more laws, more government, but yet here we are. The Georgia High School Association already has policies against this. We already know how it's supposed to work in the state. Boys compete with boys, girls compete with girls. Why do we need to codify this? Why? Because it's a great issue for Republicans to continue to run on.
So you're not worried about the destruction of female sports? You want to dynamite female sports?
You know why I'm not worried? Because the Georgia High School Association in Georgia has already set a policy. So we don't need to worry about things that are already
That can be reversed by a Democrat
addressed.
governor. That's the point. It can be reversed by a new governor.
I promise you it's not. This is not a Democratic platform issue. And yes, we have failed to articulate clearly on it, but this is not something that when I was at Thanksgiving dinner, no one at our house talked about transgender children competing.
Well, that's good.
But what we did talk about is how we want to live in a world where we embrace everyone for who they are, even if we don't understand their lifestyle or their choices.
Hopefully everyone is against bullying. I don't see where that's going to be a big issue.
Well, stop codifying bullying.
Absolutely. But this is on the mind of voters. I mean, you go ask voters about
because
stuff.
Because Republicans keep running on it. That's why.
It was Democrats who made this an issue. No one was talking about this 10 years ago. Republicans weren't talking about this.
It's not a Democratic issue.
Democrats said we all have to accept this. and we don't.
You
There's a
ran on it,
backlash.
you're winning on it, but it's hurting people.
Final word. Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Up next, y'all are taking advantage of my no voice.
You said we should.
Up next, a family meeting of sorts for leaders of Georgia's Democratic Party, how they move forward after the results of the presidential election. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Leaders of Georgia's Democratic Party have been making phone calls and meeting behind closed doors to discuss the future leadership of the party, perhaps even changing its structure. Melita, you always got a lot of good insight on this issue. What are you hearing?
Well, I'm hearing from a lot of people that they want to see a change. They haven't fully come to agreement about what that change should be, but people are frustrated that the party did not perform better in Georgia. After all, we're the state that gave the world Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Young, and John Lewis, and many other civil rights leaders, and we should have been a leading battleground state in black voter turnout, and we were not. And so getting to the root problems, both about turnout and messaging and leadership, are intertwined issues, and it's not just who's the leader. It's all the underlying infrastructure that the leader can call upon for the 2026 and 2028 election cycles.
Alicia, I want to come to you since we're talking about Democrats, and I'll go to Phil and Brian.
Sure. You know, my position on this is I want us to have some resolution and fast. Because we have several elections we need to win in 2026. We know that when one party has all of the chambers, and in our case, in Georgia and federally, Republicans have everything, chances are this party is going to do some very wild things, and we'll have an opportunity in 26 to win some seats back. We have to unite as Democrats. I believe that we will. I will acknowledge that we have lost our way a little bit in terms of our natural constituencies. I do think there are a lot of folks who voted against their own interest because our messaging wasn't right. I think there's a disconnect. Education is my issue. It's one of the things that I think we are totally losing in terms of education nationally, and so we've got some work to do. And so I am excited about an opportunity. I think when you have a crisis like this, you look for the chance for opportunities. Where can we grow? Where can we learn? Where are these new leaders going to come from? We need a bench that we've got to create as a party. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I know that this little intra-party thing that's happening will come to a close very soon, and we'll be very much united in 26.
Brian, your take, because,
So be ready.
When Republicans lose, they have to look within as well. So.
Well, sure. And look, I think there's a tendency in both sides to overreact when you lose an election, even if it's by a pretty small margin. I do want to say that I agree with Senator Ossoff and that he should have a big say in who leads the Democratic Party going into the next cycle. He is at the top of the ticket. We will have a governor's race that will be under his race. He is literally at the top. And party leaders who are in elected office should have a major say over the party infrastructure. If the party doesn't do that, if they post up on them, they risk losing any impact at all, which has happened to some degree on the Republican side. Kemp's people have tweeted about how they had nothing to do with the Georgia GOP. The state Democrats risk that sort of schism if they continue down this path. Ossoff was wronged by having a private conversation leaked out. He approached the chairwoman the way a respectable adult does, one-on-one, man-to-man, to have a conversation and a heart-to-heart. And then that got leaked out, and then he was being attacked. Like, I don't want to hurt John Ossoff by praising him or being with him on this, but he's right. If he wants to change, he should be able to get change.
10 seconds, Phil.
Okay.
I know.
Well, I think that it's not the messaging, it's the policy. This is mirroring the bigger division in the state Democratic Party. If they're not going to go to the center, they're going to continue losing statewide.
All right, we'll leave it there. Winners and losers, stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Hey, Phil, let's start with you.
Great. Well, two winners we mentioned earlier in the program, former Senator Kelly Loeffler, who's going to be in the Trump cabinet, and also former Senator David Perdue, who's going to be ambassador to Communist China, and they are highly qualified. And another winner is the Georgia Board of Regents, which oversees all 26 colleges and universities in the state. They unanimously said, we are going to have a new policy in 2025. No DUI bureaucracy. It's to be eliminated. There's to be mandatory teaching of America's founding documents from the Constitution to the Federalist Papers.
Do you mean DEI?
DEI, diversity.
Okay, you said
equity.
DUI.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay.
The very divisive bureaucracy. Thank you for the analysis there. But that's my winner. The Regents did well.
All right, Melita.
I thought they were talking about Georgia football players. Atlanta's theater community this week is mourning the loss of Chris Kaiser, a 1 in a million leading man for every stage he performed on. He was a summer star at the Georgia Shakespeare Festival and became an indelible part of Christmas memories because for 16 years he played Ebenezer Scrooge. He was a great man and an actor's actor.
All right, Alicia.
So I want to give a shout out to Merle Hargrove, an 85-year-old Atlanta native who watches this show every single Sunday. Hello, Mrs. Hargrove. It is wonderful that you are with us, and thank you. I have a couple of shout outs for the men of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Theron, our colleague, is one. They celebrated their 118th Founders Day this week, so congrats to you. My loser is David Cavender from Cobb County for filing that suit against our wonderful sheriff, who is my winner for the week, Sheriff
Brian, real quick.
Owens.
My winner is Congressman Rich McCormick for taking on entitlement spending. We need it.
All right, have a great week.
Sorry.